Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another live Board Explorer reading of Narrow Boat with me, Richard Vobes, on a couple of minutes early this morning. Apologies for that. If you suddenly go, oh, wait a minute, didn't know you were live, but hey, I am. Good morning to Julia, hope you're well, and to Robert Bray, and to Sarah. Good morning. I'm sure other people will come along. David Chamberlain, hello to you. Nice to see you. My glasses are so old and knackered now that they do not sit squarely on my face anymore. I do need to... I don't know what people can do now about going to the optician. Are opticians open in this new world that we find ourselves, where you can't get close? And how would an optician do an optical test on you? Good morning to Panox, to Lisa. Nice to see you this morning. Yeah, I was thinking about that. If you suddenly lost your glasses, what would you do? Cave Wetter, greetings from New Zealand. 35 days of our lockdown. Yeah, I know that feeling. I keep going the wrong... I don't know if that looks too ridiculous or whatever. Anyway. Oh, it's cold. It's cold today, isn't it? Well, it's cold in my house. It is cold. Oh, it isn't the Vogue show. I tend to turn that one off when we're doing the Board Explorer, so that we don't have the Vogue show highlighting my head. Gives it a slightly different look and feel, I suppose. Turbo Stream, good morning. Making a coffee, and Anne Osborne, hello. As I'm reading Narrow Boat, I have made in my new cup, which has arrived the other day, if you didn't see it the other day, Floating Our Boat, in honour of Richard and Fran, who live on a narrowboat, whose name, it's not Cassandra, it escapes me what their boat's called. Lovely boat. Anyway, now have my third coffee. Oh, wow. This is only my second. Good morning, all. We're going to be reading chapter 16. I have pre-read the first two chapters, so let's hope that I do not have any problems with... I can't even remember the word that I was thinking. What tea are you drinking? It's coffee. It's coffee. It's coffee tea. That's what it is. It's just ordinary coffee. Dow Egbert's instant coffee, I'm afraid, full of chemicals. Or that's it. That's right. Constanza. What a great name. Morning to Perry. I'll be able to float a boat in my garden at this rate. Oh dear. Is it sheeting down? Is there persistent rain? Morning to Graham Roffey. Morning to Mike. Coffee. Yes. Well, just trying to keep myself up and running today. I got to think of a video to make for today. We've got a windy day. It's sunny, but it's windy. I might have to try and go out and put a microphone on and see what I can do. Anyway, before all of that, I'm a bit unprepared for today. Yesterday was such a grim old day. We'll see how we get on. This is chapter 16, Down to the Trent. Inland navigation must be the safest form of transport ever devised, and compared to the death-dealing turmoil of the modern motor car, the canal, or river, is a veritable sanctuary. The nearest approach to an accident which we encountered on the whole of our long journey occurred as we were leaving Loughborough on our way back to the river. We were approaching the narrow channel under a bridge, or a bridge hole in canal parlance, when through the arch came a party of holidaymakers in a hired punt. There would have been ample time for them to have cleared the narrows and paddled to the side, but at the sudden spectacle of Cressy bearing down upon them, they completely lost their heads and swung broadside across our bows. From my point of vantage at the tiller, It seemed that we should inevitably smash their fragile craft to pieces against the mouth of the bridge, for there was no room to alter course. All I could do was put Cressy full astern and hope for the best. The water boiled furiously under our stern, and the whole boat vibrated. But the expected collision did not come. We checked with a foot or so to spare, and the occupants of the punt, righting themselves, paddled past, making such embarrassed apologies and blushing so furiously that we had not the heart to vent upon them the storm of abuse, that mythical language of the bargee, which they evidently anticipated. This encounter had its sequel on the river an hour or so later, when, on drawing into the bank to moor for the night, I engaged reverse gear without result, our propeller ceasing to revolve. When we had contrived with difficulty to get our mooring lines ashore, I made an investigation, hoping for the best, but gloomily visualising a broken propeller shaft, a sheared key, or dire happenings inside the gearbox, any of which was capable of crippling us for many days. Luckily, however, the trouble was simple. A coupling sleeve on the propeller shaft had been loosened by the rough treatment it had received, allowing the tail end of the shaft to slide out through the stern tube until the propeller had fouled the rudder stock. It was simply necessary to push the shaft home and retighten the coupling, a job that was soon done, although it involved the impromptu bathe in the river. Because the evening was warm, this was no hardship. In fact, the tonic of cold water gave me a wonderful appetite for dinner, which was awaiting me when I had finished. The numerous slender spires of the village churches are a feature of the soft river scenery between Loughborough and the Trent. First comes Normanton, so close upon the bank that it ponders its image in the water. Then Kegworth, rising from a screen of sheltering trees, and lastly Radcliffe, a church of more humble proportions, crowning a knoll in the open fields. Was it chance, or an innate sense of fitness, that inspired the masons of old time to build their spires so often in the flat lands? Dwarfed in a hill country where the bolder tower is better suited, there can be no doubt that the soaring grace of the spire appears to best advantage in a setting of willow-fringed pastures and winding streams. When we landed at Normanton in quest for milk, we were gladdened by the sight of old buildings in good repair, some newly thatched, the first examples of living country craftsmanship we'd seen since we'd left Oxfordshire. A simple excursion into Radcliffe-on-Soar the next day was even better rewarded, although we could obtain no milk. In order to get to the village, we had to repeat our adventure on the Avon at Harvington by wading the Weir Channel at the river. In order to get to the village, we had to repeat our adventure on the Avon at Harvington by wading the Weir Channel of the river at a ford. A bed of sharp stones made the crossing extremely uncomfortable, but Radcliffe Church was worth a tender footsole and empty milk can. It appeared to have escaped alike the unwelcome attentions of the Cromwellians of the 19th century and of the 19th century restorers, so secluded in this hamlet by the river. The magnificent alabaster tombs of the Scatchervell family in the chancel were intact, the calm features of the knights and their ladies undefaced, while the whole church, innocent of Victorian make-up, glowed in its original simplicity. Nor was this all. More remarkable still if it had been furnished in rare and perfect taste. All too often the austere beauty of naked stone or mellow woodwork is marred by garish scarlet hassocks and carpets, while altars of effective simplicity are covered by hideous cloths of green, magenta, or royal blue. Here the carved altar table of natural oak, scorning all such tawdry pretensions, was quite bare, and by a stroke of genius, a narrow strip of carpet up the centre of the aisle was of a certain shade of azure blue that harmonised to perform with the greys and browns of the stone and wood. The beauty of the average country church would be enhanced tenfold if the clergy would have a few lessons in the art of church furnishing from this incumbent. Yet all was not well with this lovely church, for the fabric was in a sorry state of repair, the fine oak roof showing signs of rot, and the walls so stained and damp at the floor level as to suggest that it had been invaded more than once by winter floods. In the surrounding churchyard there were some outstanding examples of the slate tombstones, which are peculiar to this district. They hail from famous quarries of Swithland in Charnwood, and their lettering and ornamentation, which are of remarkable grace and delicacy, being the work of a group of village craftsmen founded in the 17th century. Half an hour after leaving Radcliffe, we passed through Red Hill, the last of the Saw Locks, where we gave up the pass which had carried us from Norton Junction, and presently entered the broad Trent at a meeting place of many waters. Immediately on the right the river flowed over Thrumpston Weir, while the mouth of the navigable channel, or Cranfleet Cut as it's called, for craft proceeding downstream to Nottingham, Newark and Humber lay 200 yards upstream. Directly opposite was the entrance to the Erewash Canal, leading north to Derby and Langley Mill. Save for the occasional pair of joshers, or Erewash canal boats, we had met little traffic on the Saw, but now we found ourselves in the midst of a melee of boats of every sort and size. A pair of narrow boats were coming out of an opposite lock. Numerous holiday-makers in minute pedal-driven craft were darting hither and thither like so many waterflies, with a joyous abandon that cared nothing for the rules of navigation, while to complete the congestion, a race was in progress for small sailing boats, and since there was a head wind, these were tacking from bank to bank across the stream. Turning left-handed, we forged steadily upriver, keeping a wary eye on the pedal boats, which were reminiscent both in appearance and behaviour of the Dodgem cars at a fair, and at the same time taking care to pass the amateur sailors on the right tack. In this fashion we came to Sawley Lock, the only one of the big Trent locks which we had to pass. As this was the height of the holiday season, we had been surprised at the absence of pleasure craft on the quiet reaches of the Saw, but in the next few hundred yards of the river above Sawley it amply accounted for the deficiency. A dozen or more cabin cruisers were moored head to stern along the banks, whose grass, bruised and flattened, was bestrewn with the untidy litter of paper bags, empty tins, orange peel, and the embers of picnic fires. Nearly all the boats had crew aboard, of whom some were bathing, and while others lolled on the decks to the accompaniment of the inevitable gramophone or radio. Evidently, the townsman afloat is as gregarious as his confrere, I don't know how you pronounce that, of the roads, whose habits I have frequently pondered with amazement. Often on a bank holiday I have walked or driven through fields and lanes for hours on end without meeting a soul, but on coming upon the main road found its verges crowded with cars and picnic parties with a bun's throw of each other. It would seem that the close confinement of great cities has reawakened the herd instinct of the primitive. The countryman knows no unease in the elemental silence of lonely places. But when the people of towns return to the land they have forsaken, impelled by a craving they do not understand, it is to find the solitude intolerable, so complete is their estrangement. This is one of the tragic results of the drift to the towns. We had thought of spending the night on the Trent, but the spectacle of this throng sorely induced us to change our plans, and so we continued upstream, passing under the great girder that carries the Leicester pipe of the Derwent Valley water supply over the river in a single span. The river hereabouts must have been fully 100 yards wide, and since the westering sun was dead ahead, it was over a dazzling golden pathway that we came to the end of our river journey at Derwent Mouth. On our right was the mouth of the tributary Derwent, and between the converging rivers lay the entrance to the Trent and Mersey Canal, England's first coast-to-coast waterway, and James Brindley's masterpiece. By this time we had become so accustomed to travelling on the broad rivers that it seemed strange to find ourselves once more confined to such a narrow channel of dead water. The banks, overgrown with tall reeds, appeared to crowd in upon us, an effect that was heightened by the great clumps of reed that had broken away from the banks and floated into deep water, often forming what appeared to be an impassable barrier until they were swung aside by Cress's bows. By the time we had worked our way through the first of the 2 canal locks and had come to Shardlow, darkness was falling fast, so we moored for the night in the meadows just beyond the village. And that's the end of chapter, whatever I said it was, 16. This must be chapter 17 coming up. Let's catch up with some of your chitter-chatter, he says. Constanza, that's right, that's where we got to. Good morning, good morning. I'm drinking tea, says Ramibu mixed with peach ginger. Oh, right, okay. Sounds very tasty. Death-dealing motor car. What would they think of supercars? Supercar. Do you remember Supercar? That was a Jerry Anderson thing, wasn't it? Supercar. How is everybody this morning? Yes, very well, thank you. Give me some Yorkshire Gold tea. How about you? Trev's travels by narrowboat. It's been a while since I did the Saw navigation. What's it like? Trev? Ben Reed. Oh, by the way, just so you know, drinking my float in the boat mug. I have a lumber injection scheduled for tomorrow. Oh my goodness. The fall has made the back worse the last few days, and I'm afraid I've cracked some ribs. Oh golly. Blessed though, it could have been worse. Could have been better. Could have been that you didn't fall. That would have been nice. Good morning, Fiona. Linda Kane says, sorry to hear the difficulties. Not sure I could sound so positive. Exactly. I think I would be moaning and groaning like the best of them. Emergency situation, so I can get... Yeah, brilliant. I must get back into a narrowboat soon. It's just too joyous to be away. Thanks, Trev's Travels. Are you Travels by now? Are you still in a narrowboat, Trev's Travels? I'd be interested to know if you're still doing it. And where are you if you are? What part of the canal network are you in? This is chapter 15. 15, 16, 17. 17. Love supercar, says Mike Stevens. Supercar. It was actually before my time, really. I only know it in retrospect. I don't know it having seen it for the first time. I think the first of the Jerry Anderson stuff was Thunderbirds, probably. And that was a repeat when it was on. But I absolutely loved it. There's that strange feeling when you watch something and you discovered it for the first time. You're not being told about it, you've just discovered it. I remember a couple of programs that I watching the telly, and it came on, didn't know what it was. And as a child, or as a younger person, absolutely blown away because it was so different at the time. Doing some online research into local mills, mines and weaving sheds, I found video and pictures of local mills in the area dating back to 1825 and mines as far back as 1798. Wow. I bet they're good. Fireball XL5, yes, that was another one. What a rabbit hole, says Mark Donny McLeod. Yes, I bet. And these are local to you, are they, presumably? Interesting to see those pictures. Right. Singing Shardlow and Storm at Findurn. Not Findon here, but Findurn. I don't know if that's stressed. I've stressed the Dern on that one because it's D-E-R-N. Findurn. The wharves and the warehouses of Shardlow constitute the eastern terminus of Brinley's Great Canal, and the village has sprung up around them in the same way that Crewe has grown up besides the railway yards. Here the parallel ends, however, for when Crewe was built, the new industrial order was already firmly established, and the short-sighted aim of the immediate commercial gain had finally swept away the last remnants and permanence and grace from architecture. Shardlow dates from the dawn of the new era, and the canal buildings bear witness to the fact that these qualities had not been lost then. The masons of a century and a half ago built them to endure, and endowed them also with the dying spark of that fire that once made the humblest barn a thing of beauty. The saw is very picturesque, but as in the book, the shops are far and way between. Ah, interesting. One large 3-storey warehouse, which in modern hands would have been a featureless barrack. I love that description, a featureless barrack. So many featureless barracks they build today, was miraculously transformed by a combination of detail so subtle that it was difficult to discover why it should be so satisfying to the eye. Doubtless the secret lay in the pitch of the roof, in the shape and spacing of the windows, and in the colour of the wide mortised bricks, while a low, wide arch under the foundations, beneath which the boats could run to unload, gave the whole ponderous mass an unsubstantial air which called to mind the fairy-like painted castles of the boat cabins. In the same manner, round-headed doorways and a curious projecting gable end lent character and charm to an old malt house adjoining the Malt Shovel Inn. We found no less than 3 canal-side inns at Shardlow, each with its staunch little clientele of regulars playing each other at darts or setting the affairs of the village and nations to rights over a pint of Burton ale. No club is more exclusive than the bar of a village inn, and perhaps it was because we respected this fact that we were greeted with kindness and natural courtesy, 2 qualities which the townsman of today has lost. Least prepossessing externally, but most entertaining of the trio, was the Canal Tavern beside Shardlow Lock. By day, the jovial landlord, of this inn plies his trade as a blacksmith, but in the evenings he turns musician, settling his burly figure onto a stool before the old bar piano and rattling off all the favourite familiar songs, simple, sentimental or bawdy, while his patrons sing themselves hoarse. We heard the strains of Daisy Bell drifting over the water long before we reached the house, and when we entered we were at once invited to swell the chorus of singers who lined the benches round the walls with their pint glasses set before them. The company was representative of both sexes and every age, from a party of village youths, who evidently preferred an evening's full-blooded entertainment at the tavern for 2 hours of synthetic sentiment in the cinema, to an old lady who we were told, in a stage whisper, was over 80 years of age, and would, when the mood was upon her, dance in the clear space between the tables, footing it as lightly and as nimbly as a girl. Unfortunately, this spectacle was denied us, but it was enough to watch her as she entered heart and soul into the singing, with a harsh but surprisingly tuneful voice, like a male falsetto, nodding her head and swinging her glass in time to the music. Despite innumerable wrinkles and almost a total lack of teeth, her features were wonderfully firm and youthful, while her hair was as dark and as lustrous as her eyes. After several songs in chorus, notably a long and bawdy version of Old King Cole, with a rowdy refrain which echoed to the rafters, we were treated to a solo by the local lock-keeper, a swarthy, handsome fellow in his early 30s, who gave a most able rendering of Old MacDonald, with with great fluency and spirit. Then, acquiescing coyly to insistent requests, the landlady obliged with a very sentimental ditty, sung in a quavering contralto, which drew silent tears from the old lady. Meanwhile, the drawing and carrying of beer were entrusted with delightful informity to voluntary helpers, most notably among these being an elderly engine driver. Uncle Jack, as he was affectionately called, bustled untiringly to and fro in his shirt sleeves, singing lustily, a cloth cap perched on the back of his silvery head. His rosy countenance radiated benevolent good humour in a perpetual grin, and his blue eyes was as sharp and as quizzical as a robin's. For all its mediocre appearance, the landlord and the patrons have brought the Canal Tavern nearer to the spirit of an older and happier rural past than all the oldie inns and their sham timber and bogus brasses. The scene in the bar would have delighted Hogarth or Rabelais. It swept the imagination into the past when the countrymen of England were still merry, to the days before the repressive effects of Puritanism and the Enclosures Act had between them contrived to kill the spontaneity and break the ties of the rural communities. It was with genuine regret that we took our leave of this jovial company, and on the morrow looked back until a bend in the canal hid the wharfs and inns of Shardlow from our sight. The weather was overcast and threatening, for a thunderstorm in the night had not cleared the air, and when we met our friend the lock-keeper at Aston Lock, it began to rain heavily. Nothing daunted, we continued on our way up the valley towards Weston-upon-Trent, and were rewarded not only by an improvement in the weather, but by a more than unusually attractive canal scene. For a mile or more the waterway hugged the wooded slope of the river bank, and between the boles of the trees which leant gracefully over the water, we caught glimpse of the winding river with the green slopes of Donnington Park beyond. The locks hereabouts were wide and so deep that it was sometimes impossible to clamber from Cressy's deck onto the lock parapet. Several of the cottages beside them were small shops selling twist tobacco, highly coloured sweets or mineral waters, and one at Western Lock served as a toll office for westbound boats. By the time we reached the lock at Swarkston, the junction of the Derby Canal, the sun, which had at last struggled clear of a sultry, steaming haze, was blazing down from a cloudless sky with such intensity that every solid outline appeared to waver in the shimmering air, and the tar blistered on our deck. A canal lock, with its outspread beams, graceful bridge and attendant cottage ringed about with flowers, is an addition to any landscape and the dominant feature of the canal scene. The lock at Swarkstone was still further enhanced by the garden of a second cottage, which occupied the narrow triangular plot of ground between two converging waterways. With its massed borders of sweet-scented country flowers, smooth lawn, and heavily laden apple trees, it resembled an enchanted island in the still water, and so beguiled us that it was not until we had journeyed some 2 miles on our way that we had realised that we had left both our lock windlasses behind. It seemed that there was nothing for it but to trudge back along the towpath, for one of the minor drawbacks of canal travel is the impossibility of turning the boat round at will. In the heyday of the canals, when boats traded to every village wharf, turning places, or winding holes, were common enough, but as the wharfs fell into disuse they became filled up with mud or overgrown with weeds and reeds, with the result that in junctions or the basins of the larger towns were the only turning places. We had therefore resigned ourselves to a weary tramp, and were arguing whether one or both of us should go, when we sighted a large farm on the right bank, called, according to my map, Alston House. Thither we went, to our usual quest for milk, and with the idea that perhaps I might be able to borrow a bicycle. We found substantial outbuildings in good repair, and received a general impression of prevailing order and efficiency, a welcome change from that dispirited air of neglect and decay which pervades the majority of English farms today. Owing to the abnormally wet season, the hay harvest had evidently just been completed, although August was almost at an end, for several hermaphrodite wagons were standing, is that right? Hermaphrodite, I don't know, were standing in the yard besides new-made ricks, yet unthatched. I'd never actually seen a wagon of this type before, although I recognised it at once from the drawing and description in Mr. Hannell's fascinating but tragic book, Change in the Farm. It consists of an orthodox two-wheeled tumbrel, which can be speedily converted into a light harvest wain by the addition of a forecarriage, the whole making a combination so serviceable that it's surprising it's not more widely used. A measure of the charm of these old agricultural implements, built by local craftsmen, however, is their regional character, and according to Mr. Hennell, the home of the Mophrodite, or the mufferer, as the countrymen call it, is North Lincolnshire and part of Norfolk. Whether or not the farmer of Alston was a Lincolnshire man we didn't discover, but he was certainly extremely obliging, not only filling our can with new milk, but prevailing upon his cowman to lend me his bicycle. So while Angela laid tea on the foredeck, I pedalled furiously back to Swarkstone, found one windlass after some search, and returned all in less time than it had taken for Cressy to make a single journey, and no longer than the tea kettle had taken to boil. We had not gone much further our way that evening before the sky began to darken ominously, towering thunderclouds sweeping up astern. We heard the first distant roll of thunder as we left Stenson Lock, and though we ran before the storm for a mile or so, it became obvious that we could not hope to evade its swift advance. So we moored hurriedly by the village of Ferndon just as the first heavy drops of rain were plopping sullenly into the water. It was the worst storm either of us had ever experienced, raging without pause for over 3 hours. Many branched fork lightning flickered incessantly on 3 sides, illuminating the cabin with its vivid glare as the great storm belt travelled slowly northwest from the direction of Ashby de la Zeus, across the Trent Valley and over Needwood Forest. We had to shout to make ourselves heard above the roar of the tropical deluge on the floor, on the roof, and the repeated crashes of thunder. At 10:30 that night, when the fury of the storm had at last abated, we were surprised to hear the familiar exhaust beat of an approaching motorboat. Looking out, we were in time to watch her, a loaded Fellows Morton, glide by and to exchange greetings from her steerer. His legs were indistinguishable in the light from the cabin, but his head and shoulders were invisible from the boat, for the boat carried no external light, and the night was black as pitch, save when an occasional flicker of lightning afforded a momentary glimpse of the dark skyline of trees. Only once have I tried navigating a narrowboat by night, and then decided to give the boatman best. He rivals the canal. He rivals the owl or the cat in his ability to find his way over the most tortuous waterway in almost total darkness. We're on page 100, and this is chapter 18 that we are going to approach. I haven't read that one. Let's have a gander with Miranda. Let's have a look. Looking forward to that. I love Marina. Oh, Marina, yes, Marina. I lost you for a while. That is the problem sometimes with internet on a narrowboat. Yes, I can imagine. No restricted to narrowboats, Trev. Do you have a small generator to have the electricity or to charge up certain points along the canal? Not restricted. I was wishful seeing the price of the cruise from New York to Cornwall or Brighton may be cheaper after COVID-19. At the moment, it appears to be going up. A price of a cruise? You mean on a liner? By narrowboat. Yeah. Narrowboat. Trev travels by narrowboat. Says electric is generated by the engine. I'll be installing solar panels as soon as the lockdown ends. That's a good idea. So when the engine is off at night, you've no electricity. I have 4 batteries on board, 1 for starting the engine and the other 3 for domestic power. I have an inverter, so have both 12 volt and 230 volt on the boat all day and night. The waterways are still very friendly. Yeah, I mean, when we went, it seemed to be very friendly on our holiday. Although, you know, when you hire a boat for a week, you do feel like frauds, really. That's how we felt. But of course, each one of those is a potential purchaser of a boat, because you just fall in love with the slowness and the way of life. And isn't that a thing? Isn't it? You know, we go and we do that and we fall in love with that way of life. And few make the transition and make it a dream come true. And others, for whatever reason, either can't afford to buy a boat or they just can't, you know, their work and their domestic situation prevents them from doing that, or they've just got too much stuff, or they've got to look after parents, or they've got children, or whatever it is. I've noticed that many narrow boats have solar panels fitted. Now, I passed 4 this morning by Barrowford Lock Stairs. Well, I mean, that technology has got to be an advantage for the narrowboat owner, isn't it? If you can have free energy, but more that you don't have to keep relying on engine and sourcing the fuel, if your fuel is coming from the sun, it saves you having to think about where you next get it from and store it, I suppose. I love the life, and it was a dream for many years. That's amazing. I guess you can't go terribly far at the moment with the lockdown. Are you a bit like Fran and Richard, just to be able to pootle from wherever the water source is and back again, or are you able to move around a bit? I like Rolt's description of the toothless black-haired woman. Yeah, his descriptions are amazing. It was cool this morning, and I could have gone more miles, as it was easier to cycle in this weather than the hot or freezing, but I have the time factor to deal with yet. Well, apparently it's supposed to be windy, but looking outside, it doesn't seem to be terribly windy. Solar has come on in leaps and bounds, definitely. Well, I'm going to leave it there today because I need to go and decide what the hell I'm going to do for a video for tomorrow morning. Yes, stuck in rugby. Ah, bless you. That must be quite tricky because you've got that that sort of roving gypsy lust of being able to just go, and suddenly you're restricted, like the rest of us. But you know, we're used to having our bricks and mortar firmly stuck in place, usually. But having that where you take the whole of your whole house and life with you, and now you're sort of stuck a bit, must be quite frustrating. He has been to the pubs in Burnley. Has he been to the pubs? He could not find a lot more toothless old women there. Water Point is just 150. Yes, good stuff. It's windy in Bognor, is it? Oh, well, I won't be going to Bognor then. I don't know where I shall go or what I should do. I've got to try and think. The sun seems to be shining. It's threatening some rain a bit later. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, sorry, it's just a short one today, but I did pre-read the two. Sometimes his chapters are longer than others, and I pre-read the two, and I wanted to make sure I pre-read it. The next, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, see, I could do this next one, but I will leave it there because I need to get sorted with another video. But anyway, short one today. Just so you know, I will be doing another one tomorrow, but I'm going to take the weekend off. I know that's almost unheard of, but the weekend I've got to go to my dad's place and sort out his garden because it's completely overgrown and we've got complaints about it. So at the weekend, so assuming that the sun is out, I should just take Saturday and Sunday off and then be back Monday to do another run of these. So tomorrow we'll try and make a goodie and take it from there. Anyway, thanks very much. Look after yourselves, and I will catch up with you tomorrow or later on today or whenever. So, right. Toodle pip for now. Thanks for coming along, and catch you tomorrow. Bye for now. Bye-bye.